Okay, we're recording. So today we're going to talk about class methods, and we're going to explore the difference between class methods and instance methods. So we haven't used these terms, or maybe we have used these terms a little bit in passing, but we haven't focused yet on the difference and what is an instance method and what is a class method. Actually, before I continue, can I have a thumbs up if you can hear me and see my screen? Okay, perfect. We're going to use class methods to help us instantiate instances of that class. And we're going to go through a lot of the little details about if class methods and instance methods have the same name. What does that mean? What does that look like? So we're going to say these words a lot today, instance method and class method, so they might become nonsensical. So what I want you to do as a warm-up is take a look at this code right here. And we'll just spend a few minutes here. So look at this code and just think about these questions. So take about a minute and a half to do that. All right, I'd love to hear from some of you. I don't actually know how Zoom orders your faces. I don't think it's alphabetical. It's definitely not alphabetical. So, John, you're the first face on my screen here. So, what do you think on this first question? When I'm asking, what do we call the method say hello on? What would be your response to that?
I would say we call it on the SAM, which is a user object.
Awesome. Right. So we're calling this method on an object or an instance of the user class. Yes, well put, right? So because we're using this method on an instance, we call it an instance method. Okay. And now, Connor, you're next. Thank you, John. How about this next question, Connor? What do we call the method new on?
You're calling the method new on the class of user.
Yeah. So what kind of method do you think that's called?
Class method.
Good job. Don't think too hard about it. Right. So it turns out we can actually call methods on the class itself. So, and we'll talk about why we're going to do this and different syntaxes. But the thing, you might have heard this phrase that in Ruby, everything's an object, right? Well, it turns out that the class itself is an instance of another class called class, right? So I know that sounds crazy and all meta, but because the class that we create here is an instance of the Ruby class of class, it's actually an object. And so we can call a method on that object. Sam here, we've been using these words instance and object interchangeably, but it's just an object from the user class. And so we can call a method on that. So we're going to talk the rest of today about when is a good idea to create an instance method versus a class method. So the first thing I'm actually going to have you do, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms just for about 5 minutes or so to do a little exploration and discussion on this. So I'm going to drop this in your Slack channel, and I'm going to have you think about these and just discuss them with your group. You'll notice too, it says if there's time, you can think about some pseudo coding about what these methods might do. I don't want you to go into actual coding, so you don't necessarily have to have someone be the driver or the screen share if you don't want to, but use what's in your Slack channel to prompt the discussion that's about the social media class. Okay, any questions about what you're doing for the next 5 or 7 minutes? All right, off you go. Okay, welcome back. Thumbs up. You can see me, hear me, and see my screen. Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about this because I know you all picked up on the differences of the syntax in these methods, but I want to talk a little bit about what is the different functions of these methods. So I would love to hear from Aiden's group. I should have had each of you pick a speaker, so I apologize. I'm going to spring this on you. But if either, well, how about Aiden? If you want to come off mute and kind of discuss a little about what your group discussed about the differences between like this method of rating versus self.most popular.
Yeah. So we sort of discussed about like kind of like what they would do and how they did it. We like so the rating is an instance method, and the most popular is a class method, and I'm not exactly sure what you want beyond that.
Yeah, that's okay. So, well, I guess talk to me a little bit like, so how would we call this method of rating? Like if we had,
Yeah.
say, an instance, social
So
media.
if Bob was a social media user and he had an ID in a rating, you have to initialize the rating
Oh,
with.
thank you.
But then you could call Bob.rating,
Mm-hmm.
and it won't return anything right now because it's not actually doing anything.
Sure,
But if you
sure.
put like, code in it, it would do stuff.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to call most popular, you would have to do social media user dot most popular.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so talk to me a little bit about, sorry, just put you on the spot here. But if the code, the implementation code was here and it was working, what would this method, this instance method of bob.rating, what would that return?
It would return. I would assume that would return the instance variable rating.
Yeah, so here it would return 5, right? So it's the instance variable for this specific instance of Bob, right? Because if we had, another one of Jane, a social media user here, and she had a 3, then that same method for Jane.rating would return 3, right? So it's very much tied into the specific instance, right? And then Aiden, how about most popular? What did your group discuss? Like what would be the return value of most popular, do you think?
Well, we kind of expected that it would be an instance of social media user.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like in this example, Bob. So.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much, Aiden, for participating. So the idea here, right, is that our class method is kind of looking through all the instances that exist of itself. Remember when way back when, like years ago, when we first learned about a class, I'm just kidding, that was 3 weeks ago, but it feels like years ago, we learned like a class is like a blueprint, right? And with that blueprint, we can create lots of instances. Okay, so the class knows about all the instances that were created from it. So we can ask the class to look across all the instances and do some kind of comparison in here to find the social media user instance that has the best rating, right? As opposed to this method, which is the instance method, where we're only asking a very specific instance about its rating, right? Is there a way, do you think, that I could ask Bob for Jane's rating? First of all, would it be possible code-wise? And would it be a good idea? Roberto, you're shaking your head. Can I have you come off mute and just talk a little bit about your thoughts?
I'm just thinking like, yes, code-wise, you can have Bob gets Jane's rating, but it wouldn't really be necessary or should not be necessary directly. Because what does Bob need Jane's rating for?
Yeah, Totally. Like every instance, like, yeah, probably code wise, we could definitely write a really clever script to get that information, right? But when we think about this idea of object-oriented programming, and you'll have a lesson on principles of object-oriented programming, I think next week, but there's this idea of the law of Demeter, or the principle of least knowledge, which means every instance or every object should know as little as possible about all the other things. Right? And it's also about thinking about what is the job of this one object. So Bob is just a single user. He should really only know about himself. Same with Jane. She should only know about herself and the attributes that are specific to her, right? But the social media class, its job is to know about all the social media instances. So we could definitely ask the class itself to look across all those instances and pick the one that's the most popular. Any questions yet about kind of this idea? I know it's very still, you know, theoretical in the ethers, but any questions yet? Cheryl?
For a class method, does it always have to start with self dot?
Yeah, actually, yes, perfect. So that kind of leads me just into my next thing about syntax. Syntax wise, adding the self dot in front of the method name indicates that it is a class method. So I'm glad you picked up on that. I'm sure a lot of you did, right? And that lets us know that we're calling it on self, which is the class itself. We're going to say that word a lot today. And so this is how we would call it. Now, you've been using this class method of .new a lot. Maybe we just didn't know all the words to describe it, but now we know .new is a class method that we call on the class itself. Will, go ahead.
Yeah, we got into a conversation in our team group. Is .new the same? Is initialized method? Should that actually be called like self.new?
Great question. So no, this is how initialize should be called. So what does that tell you about the type of method initialize is?
It's an instance method.
It is. So what's going on here is .new creates an instance of this class and then calls initialize on that instance to set all of its attributes. And Ruby does that behind the scenes. But that's a really great question. Thinking
I
about,
guess the question is why don't we see a self.new? Why do we have to create a self.new method for .new to work?
Right, so that is built in. So remember, this class itself is an object from a higher class. You learned about like inheritance and stuff today, right? So there's a Ruby class called class. So example, like the class of array. What class would be the class of array? Hold on, before I do that, what if we had an array? Like we just created an array. An a.class. What class does array come from? Array, right? Sorry, I'm asking everyone too, but so when we create an actual array, right, we are instantiating an array. So that instance is from the array class, but yeah, you're right. The class of array itself is from class, which is in Ruby. And so I actually don't know where the .new is written, but my guess is it would be in this class, where there is a method, but it would probably actually be a instance method, because every class in Ruby is an instance of this class, right? It gets all mind bendy when you start getting out there, but that's a really good question. All right. So let's look at some more examples of this to really buckle down, what can we use class methods for? I mentioned in our learning goals talking about using class methods to help us initialize instances of a class, right? So maybe we have a whole bunch of information about, I've got a user class here. We have a whole bunch of information about users, like this. And we want to give this information, it's just a hash right now, or a nested array. And we want to give this information to our class so that the class itself can do the job of instantiating a bunch of user instances just based off of the collection of data that we give it. right? So I'm actually going to have you think about this on your own for a minute. So let's walk through this test. So we can see in the test, I've got an array of hashes with some information. And I know that I want a specific method. So this would be like the method that I'm calling to collect the new users. And that's what I want to test is the return value of this new users. Each new user should be, this helps indicate like what the return value should be, right? What would we call .each on? But each new user should be an instance of user. There should be 3 of them, and the first one should have the name of cat. Right? So take a minute, a couple minutes, and see if you could come up with some implementation code to make this test pass. Whether it's just in a text editor, I know you can't test it because you don't have this code, or jot it down in a notebook. But even if all you get is the structure of the method, that's okay. But just take a minute and see if you can think through some implementation code for this one. Okay, let's come back together. I know you want lots of time to work on this. You probably want the test so you can actually test it too. How about Sean with an S? What do you think? How would I even start writing the implementation code to make this test pass, do you think?
I'm Sean Steele.
Yeah, last name is that your thing?
S, sorry. Yes, Sean
All right.
S. Sorry, I'll work on that. Wait, did I say Sean with an S? Is that what I said? That's helpful, isn't it? All right, go ahead, Sean.
Honestly, I'm not real sure.
Cool, that's okay. Let's phone a friend. How about Brian? Brian, what do you think? How would I even start writing some code for this?
Well, you would want to create a method.
Mm-hmm.
So def new users. Well, I guess I got kind of tripped up because do you need like create self.create multiple users?
Yeah, that's exactly what I need, right? Because this is the method in question. I need a method where this will create multiple users that doesn't currently exist. So that's exactly the method we're trying to create. And you mentioned I need to write it with a self, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what made you think that?
Well, because in the test you had like new users equal user.create multiple users with the argument users, but users, since you're already you have a hash called users, so I just assumed that went into the argument there.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so the fact that this method is being called on the entire class itself, right, indicates that it needs to be a class method. Because if I just did this, actually, let's see what the error would be. Thank you so much, Brian and Sean with an E, for your help. Let's see make a guess right now what my error is going to be when I run this test. Oh, sorry, you can't see everything. Okay. What's this error going to be? Let's see if you're right. It is undefined method, create multiple users. Is that what you thought? Right? Because I do have a method called create multiple users, but here the method it's looking for is for user class, not a user instance, right? So it's looking for a class method called create multiple users. So we've got to add that self dot in front of it so that we can hit the method. And then here our error should change. Right now we just, it's returning nil. So when we're calling .each on new users, it's not working because this method's right now returning nil, which makes sense. We haven't written any code in there, right? So what do we think the code should be? Hope you have your hand raised. I'm not sure. Do you have a question or do you want to help me write the code for this?
I'm helping.
Oh, great. So what should the actual code inside of this look like?
So it doesn't need to be any more complicated than an each.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do users.each do user and then user.
Yeah, now what?
Uh,
What am I trying to do ultimately with this method?
new, I'm sorry, self.new.
Oh, I guess I could do that. Let's do it this way though. When you said self.new, like what are you referring to with that self?
The class.
The class, right? So we could do this. And I'll fix this in a second, but I want to do this to illustrate it. Right?
Either way works.
Mm-hmm. And then what do I need to pass in? Because like initialize is what we look for what arguments to pass into .new, right? So I need a name. How do I get a name from here?
You use the bracket notation for a symbol called name.
Like this?
I think so.
Let's look at this for a second for maybe, let's put a pry right here.
Hold on. No, that's not quite gonna. So that is supposed to be an argument. It should be user bracket name.
Right. Yep. So I put a pry in there, right? So inside of our block. So users is this array of hashes. So we're using .each to iterate through. So user is just this hash. And yeah, you're right. We want to just grab the name out of this. So we can just call user. Okay. Come on. And then get some parentheses in there, right? So now we're extracting the name from the hash of user, and we're sending that into the argument here of our user.new to instantiate a new user, right?
That should work, right?
Well, will it? Let's check our test. Negative, where's my output?
An instance of a user, not a hash.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Right? Because what did we actually want this to return? Right, we've got create multiple users. Probably we want this to return not this.
Okay, that's troublesome. We could create a class method to collect all the new users and then report it at the end.
Mm-hmm. How about, yeah, Joshua, what do you think? Thank you, Hope, for your help in writing that.
Actually, sorry. Well, I guess I could think out loud right now if you want. So we're calling, I guess we need to create something that holds our new users.
Mm-hmm. Why? What makes you think that?
Because in your tests, you are looking at the new users and first name to verify that it's cat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And also right here, I can see that what I'm expecting new users to respond to is a .each. So I know it needs to be probably an array or a hash, but probably an array. And each element should match this assertion, right? So each element of this new users array should be a user object.
Yeah. So if we're going to use the dot each, we could create a placeholder for new users within that method, and then just shovel the user dot new code block into that array.
Yeah, we could do that.
And then I would.
And we need to make sure we return it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But
could also, right, we could use map as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because map will, whoops, not this piece, will return our transformed array. Right, so map will take each of these, this user.new, and instantiate and replace the hash with the actual user instance. Cool. Joshua, did you actually have a question though? Is that where you're raising your hand? Or were you?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much for your help. So perfect. Okay. Any other questions about what we did here? It's a little funky, right? Will?
Could we have done this if it were, this is probably, I mean, this doesn't make any sense to do this way, but if you got rid of the self dot in that method definition, could you have an instance method that could create instances of new users?
Yeah, this goes back to that discussion I was asking about Bob and Jane knowing about each other. Could we? Sure, we can really use code to do almost anything, but should we is the other question. Should it be the job of the user cat to instantiate other users? Right?
Okay.
Probably not. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question, Will. And I think it's something that we have to constantly think about, right? Cat, the instance, the user instance of cat probably shouldn't have that kind of power, right? We would assign that responsibility to the user class. The user class should be in charge of instantiating itself. Joshua, question.
So in this example, we use, instead of self.new, we use user.new.
Yeah.
When, I guess, what's standard to use to refer to the actual class versus using self?
Yeah, it gets a little interesting here. And if you want to use user.new, I am fine with that. However, if you look right here, so we're in Pry, we're inside of this block. If this gets too like meta and your brain hurts, that's okay. Just be okay with that discomfort for now. If I type self right now in Pry, what is self? So we saw here, we're using that as a definition to define a class method. But here I'm on line 10 and I'm asking everyone this question, right? Think about on line 10, if I type self, what's going to be returned? Let's check. The user class. Okay, so here's a funky thing, and maybe write this down. Self, inside of a method, if you ever call the word self, what it's going to refer to is the object you call the method on. What method? The method that you're inside. Right? So this create multiple users, we call this method on the user class right here. Nope, right here. Okay, we call the method right here. And so self becomes whatever we call that method on. So let me show you this too while we're on this topic, and I will answer the question. But let's go into a Pry right here in our initialize. Remember, we already established initialize is an instance method. Right? So when we get into that, now if I call self, well, here, let me show you what name is first. Name is cat. So now if I do self, what do you think self is going to be here? And this one might be a little trickier. You have to think about like, what is initialize being called on? A user object. A user instance, which the attributes have not been set yet. That's why we don't see any of those. Maybe this would be illustrated better if I did this. Right, so now if we do self, now we can see, oh, name is Bob now. So we can see that self is this specific instance. Because remember, after .new is called, an actual instance is created and initialize is called on that instance. So instance methods are called on instances. So self becomes the instance you called that method on. Again, if this is mind bendy, that is okay. You do not have to master this self concept today. Okay. Going back to the original question though, oh, look, I had it in here. Oh gosh, so if self is what we called the instance on, would this still work? Because remember when we were in Pry and right here and I typed self was user, right? The user class right here. So in this case, self and user are synonymous. And the funnier thing, weirder thing with Ruby is you actually, self dot is always implied if you're calling a method from within a method. If that was like, your brain's like, what? Like, I don't know what's going on right now. You can always just do this for now until this concept of self and calling methods from methods becomes more cemented. So you could do it like this. You could just call new. Test still pass, right? Because the self dot is implied in Ruby whenever it sees a method being called from inside of a method. Okay, did that help a little bit? What is the more conventional way is probably to leave this off completely, but sometimes when we're doing class methods, people might still keep the name of the class there just to make it very clear on what's going on. Okay, Mike, you have a question? And then we'll take a POM. No question, Mike, or yes question? Sorry, I don't know where you are.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, okay.
Just a clarifying question. You mentioned the principle that this whole concept that you're explaining is based upon, where it's like it's not Cat's job to instantialize all these objects. What is that principle called again?
It's either called principle of least knowledge or the law of Demeter, but it's an idea of, I'm definitely not going into it because I'm not a pro on it, but it's this idea that a thing, an object, should only know about itself and information that directly pertains to it. It shouldn't know, Jane or Bob shouldn't know about any other user instance that exists.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's take a POM and let that sink in, and then we'll come back and talk more about this. Ah. Questions during that POM. None yet. You don't even know what questions to ask. That's okay. Let's explore some more. So I've got another class here, a greeter class. So like similar to the user class, but so we've got a greeter class, has a name. There's two methods here, and both methods are called the same thing, right? So we kind of went over this a little bit. Hopefully you can identify right now which one is the class method and which one is the instance method. How about this? In your participants tab, I wish it had like numbers. Put the green yes if you think this is the class method, or the red no if you think this is the class method. Awesome. Cool. Everyone's choosing this one. Perfect. And we know that just because of the self dot, right? So that's not too hard to identify the class methods, but when you start writing the class methods, that is a piece that people forget a lot. So just make sure you've got that self dot in front when you actually want a class method. And now, so when I call, if I want to call this instance method, for example, how about Eduardo? If you can come off mute, how would I call this method on line 12?
You would just call one of your objects. So Bob.sayHello.
Awesome. Okay, and then how about Eduardo? What if I wanted to call this one on line 8? What would I do?
You would call your class, so capital greeter.sayHello.
Awesome. And then we can test that out. I keep moving things around here. What is this one? Ruby. I'm just in my greeter. Great. And so what we expected, right, was for the instance method to run, and then for the class method to run, because that's the order we called them in. And from the outputs, the order of the outputs, we can see that that's the order that these were done. So my point in this is to show that you can have an instance method and a class method called the same thing, right? Because both of these methods are called say hello. But when they will respond, it depends on how you call them. Because when you do this, Ruby's looking specifically for an instance method versus when you call it on the class, Ruby will be looking for that class method. Okay. Okay. Robert, go ahead.
So in this instance, why would you call the class method instead?
Yes, this is a slightly trivial example. Maybe you've got like, maybe the greeter class is kind of like also in charge of hiring new greeters, right? A greeter, right? Someone, when you enter a store, it's the people who say, hello, how you doing? How can I help you? That's what I'm thinking of. So maybe the class of greeter, why, I don't know, to be honest. Like, it's hard to think of examples sometimes, right? So maybe the whole like department itself would say hello. It's a good question. Nick, go ahead.
Can you run the greeter say hello method even if you don't have any like objects created in your class?
Oh, that's a good question. So like this, so if we had 0 objects created and we just wanted to call this, let's try it. Yep, it would still run, right? Because we're calling it on the class. So that it doesn't matter if there's any instances. The class is what's responding to that method. That's a great question. Okay. What if we wanted all the greeter instances to say hello, right? There's some kind of like convention in town. And so we recruited all the greeter instances to come in and say hello. Do you think a method of like maybe everyone say hello, do you think that would be an instance method or a class method? Or have we made it fuzzy now? Any ideas? Joshua?
I'm wondering if you could call the class method say hello, but within that class method, maybe call it the instance method say hello.
Oh.
So that prints it out for every instance.
Yeah, let's explore that. So whenever I think about, should it be a class method or should it be an instance method for something? I think about, okay, well, will this, whatever action I'm trying to create or whatever method, is it affecting a single instance or is it affecting all the instances? Or do I need to like look at a single instance or do I need to look at all the instances, right? And in this case, if we want to look at all the instances, it should be a class method because the class is the only thing that should be able to see all the instances of itself. So I like what you're thinking here. So what if we did this, right? So actually let's give this, we need a way to, right now we don't have a database. In Mod 2, you're going to have a database, so this class will be able to access all the instances. We don't have that right now, so we need to kind of feed in the instances that we have. So actually, let's create an array out here holding all of our instances, right? And then if we call this method of greeter dot say hello, now we need to pass it this array of all the greeters. Okay, so all is this array now. Okay, so what we want to do, if we can iterate through this array, we can have every greeter say hello, like Joshua suggested. So what if we did this? So each thing is a greeter, right? So what would I put in here? Let's run this. Oh, I've got it right here. So in my pry, if I look at all, what all is right here, it's an array of all these greeter instances. That's what I expected, since that's what I made down here, right? But now I'm inside of my pry, and so greeter is just a single instance, right? So if I have a single instance, it will respond to any instance method that I have. So if I do greeter dot say hello, right here in my pry, what do you think is gonna be the output when I press enter? Hi, I'm Bob, right? Because greeter is just an instance, and I called an instance method on Bob. So if I put that code in here, greeter dot say hello, and let's see what the output of this is. Awesome. Oh, that's okay. So I can see my output. I got, hi, I'm Bob. Hi, I'm Jane. Hi, I'm Joe. Right? So this cycled through each of those instances, even though we called it via a class method. Okay, so we can call instance methods from a class method as long as we're calling those on a specific instance. Joshua, go ahead.
So going back to what you were saying earlier, technically within that block, we could write self.greeter.say hello, and it would still work the same.
Let's explore that. So you're saying, right, so now I'm inside the method. If I do self right here, everyone take a guess. Remember what that thing, hopefully you wrote down what I said, what self always is. So when I press self right now, what's it going to be? The greeter class, right? Because remember, self is always the object you called the method on, the main method. No matter what's going on inside of the inside that method, whatever kind of blocks or numerable you're inside, that self keyword always refers to the object you called the method on, which in this case was the greeter class. So if I did a self dot say hello, this would only work. What'll happen? What do you think? Anyone have a guess? It's okay, don't say it out loud, just think to yourself. Right, I get an error, wrong number of arguments, because this self is the greeter. So this is trying to call the class method of say hello, but that requires an argument. So it won't respond to that. So you have to call it, you have to pull a specific greeter instance to call the instance method on. Joshua, did that help with your question a little bit?
I was just curious if you did self.greeter.say hello.
Well, what is self.greeter? Right, because
I guess it's not a thing.
right, because remember, self is the greeter class. So greeter.greeter, oh my gosh, I can't spell today, right? It's gonna error say, I don't know what a class, I don't know a method called greeter. Garrett, go ahead.
So it sounds like when you're using class methods in defining them, you're kind of going to always be like, your definition is going to usually involve some sort of like iteration through instances of that class with the code you want to do. Like, would there be situations where you wouldn't iterate through different instances if you wanted to create a class method? Like, is there anything that the class itself would do that wouldn't involve instances of the class? It doesn't seem.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. And I like that. And I think, is there a situation? Probably, right? But I can't think of one off the top of my head. I think that is a great connection to make, that typically your class method is going to do some kind of iteration through all the instances or through information to create instances, you know, like we did with this user. This is just creating instances. But here, yeah, you're going to look through all the instances to either look for something specific or to, you know, direct each instance to do something specific. I think that's a great way to look at it. Will, go ahead.
So to your example here where you have the all in there as the parameter, until we get into you know, Rails or whatever, we won't have a database. So is the only way that I could actually, like, if we want to know who the most popular instance of the class is, would we have to build like another class method that's just sort of like a collector, such that every time I run .new, it just starts putting those into an array or something like that?
Right. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of different techniques that you can use. And I'm not going to go into that too much because we'll do a little looking at that here. But that also like leads into your football project, right? Like, how can you create a collection of instances to hold on to without a database? That's a really good question. We'll look at that a little bit in the next example. Sean, question?
Yeah, I'm just curious what determines what self outputs, because when you typed it gave you the class greeter, but sometimes I do it in a test, that the prize in a test. It gives me the name of the object, like Colorado Lottery test, and then it gives me other like instance variables, like the name, the amount of assertions, and the failures. So what kind of determines what it shows to the screen?
That is a great question. And I've actually never put, like, if I had pry in a test, I've never put a self in there. So like you're saying, you would just put like a pry here out in the middle of nowhere. And then I don't know that I want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm very curious. Right. So if we type self here, well, what would self be? That's interesting. It's probably, if there's not an object in question, it might be the file that you're in. So you're in the user test. Oh, okay, because this is like an instance of user test and gives you this information. Oh, that's interesting. You know what? I am not positive on what all this is breaking down to, because I don't normally put self in there. The only time I really care about self is when I'm inside of a method in my classes, because that's when you would use the self keyword. You wouldn't ever use the self keyword in a test out here. Like, you wouldn't ever have a self out here in the test.
Okay, thanks. I was just mostly curious.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Any other questions right now? Yeah, I want to do a quick little exercise where you get to reflect for a couple minutes. So either in a notebook or in a text editor where you're keeping notes, take a couple minutes to respond to these questions and write down your answers, right? As if you were explaining this to somebody else. Can you all see this okay? So let's take about 3 minutes to go through these. Okay, can I get a volunteer to go ahead and explain the first one? I just want to talk about the first one. So if someone asks you, how would you explain the difference between a class and instance method? How would you explain that? Like think potential interview question. Todd, go ahead.
I would say for a class, a class method, it calls upon all the individual objects that are within its class of objects. And for instance, it would just call upon the individual objects utilizing their own individual attributes.
Okay, awesome. How about anyone else want to give their definition of a class method and an instance method? Let's do one more person. Garrett?
I might say that a class method, like I guess the biggest difference for me between the two is the scope. Like the scope of a class method is the entire class. So whereas the scope of an instance method is just a particular instance. So like a class method theoretically could be called on a single instance of a class, but the scope is much bigger than that, whereas an instance method, its scope is much narrower to where it has to be initialized via a specific instance of a class.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would use the word scope just because that refers to like where, where a variable is alive and where it lives. But I think your explanation is right on for both of you, Garrett and Todd. The class method, you're calling it on the class itself, and that class itself can see or should be able to see or has the responsibility of seeing all the instances of itself. So it could, do some kind of determination of finding specific instances that either meet a criteria, creating new instances, things like that. Whereas an instance method is called on a single isolated object from that class and can only know about its own attributes, or should only know about its own attributes. Taylor, go ahead.
And I guess that this is probably all happening behind the scenes, but where are all these instances of the class being stored? Or how is it finding those?
Yeah, right now, it's our job as plain old Ruby developers to store those instances somewhere to have access. Like for example, in my example here, I had to feed in those instances as an array of information, right? In Rails, and when you get into Mod 2, you're going to have a database connected to your application that will store these instances for you. But right now we don't have a database. So we do have that. That is a valid question, like where are these instances being stored? And that's probably a question you had to make. If you haven't had to make that decision yet in your project, it's coming very soon. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay. All right, we're going to do something. We're going to use the pre-work now, and we'll do it in breakout rooms. But first, I want to just kind of explore a little bit. So if you didn't do the pre-work of downloading that CSV file, that's okay. You can either have someone else drive in your breakout rooms, or you can walk through it to download the CSV. It shouldn't be take that long. But I want to explore this for a second before I let you run free. So you've got this code. No, you don't. I will give you this code to put into your name.rb file. But here's what I want us to look at. So this is like your skeleton, your starter code. You're going to have a class of name, and your job is going to be to use that CSV data to create name objects that match this initialize. Okay, so you've got some code in here. This is what kind of method is this? Now you know how to classify this as a class method, right? And this goes back to Garrett's connection of find by name is a method that indicates to me that we're going to go through some instances and we're going to probably pull out instances where the name matches the parameter that was given or the argument that was given. So I like that connection. So we've got, let me explain what this is. See this, this right here, file name with 2 @ signs? So that's not an instance variable. That's actually called a class variable now, which you're not going to see those too often, but it just changes the scope to the entire class, as opposed to instance variables, which are, well, those are also scoped to the entire class, but they act a little bit differently. A class variable has a larger scope. Anyways, but that's what this is referring to. So this is going to pull in the CSV file that you downloaded. And so we're going to use the built-in CSV class of Ruby to read in that CSV file. If you look at that file, that CSV file, it's got the first row is headers, right? So it gives titles for the columns, like year of birth, gender, etc. And so that's why we use this option right here when we're reading in the CSV file of headers true. It lets the CSV method know that that first line is headers and not just information. Okay. If this feels weird, CSVs were like the weirdest foreignness thing to me before I got into playing with them. So, but here's what I want to show. I have a pry right here within this method. I'm not going to show you how to write the method because that's going to be your job, but I want to show how this CSV file comes in. So let me run this file. I invoked the method down here on line 27. See, calling the class method and passing it a specific argument. So I can see my argument is Megan. Okay, perfect. So what is Rose holding right now? Rose is holding this object of a CSV instance of a table. Okay, maybe that's not too helpful, right? So what does this look like? Well, it turns out that this is reading this in kind of what you can think about as an array. So if we access the first element of this array, we can see we still have an instance of CSV. It's now a row. But if you look at this piece, this data structure, what does this kind of look like? Let's see if I can read lips. What do you think? No one's saying it. What is, I can't read your lips if you don't like. Anyone, you come off mute then. What do you think? What does this data structure look like?
A hash.
It looks like a hash.
Awesome. Multiple people. I love it. Yay, you win. It looks like a hash. So in programming, we have this idea of if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, then it's a duck. And what that means is if it looks like a hash and responds to hash methods, then we can treat it like a hash. So let's try this out and see if it'll respond to hash methods. So I got this by doing row 0. Okay. And let's do this key of year of birth. So remember with keys, I've got to match the data type, right? So if I query that key, will I get back the value of 2011? Indeed, I do. So whatever the structure is, it looks like a hash and it responds to hash methods, so we could use it like a hash. Okay. Same with these rows. It's hard to see like what these rows are because look at that, there's 19,000 of them. So our terminal is not going to list out all these rows for us. But the idea is it's responding to this array method of the bracket notation, and it's giving me the information for that element. So we can treat rows as an array, and then we can treat that element as a hash. Any questions about that? Hopefully, maybe one of your questions is, okay, cool, why are you showing this to me? Well, because what I'm asking you to do here is if rows is an array, that means you could iterate through it, right? And maybe you might want to do that to complete the tasks that I'm going to give you. Okay. Does my tasks? Okay. So I'm going to put the task that you're going to do in your Slack channel. But for example, the first thing you're going to do is add code to this method that's going to build an array of name objects. So you're going to need to instantiate that match the name argument. Does that make sense? You're going to go through the CSV data, and any name that matches this argument, you need to turn it into a name object and hold it in this array. Okay? I'm going to drop this in your channel. So I just dropped the code that you're going to add to your name.rb file, as well as some of the tasks that you're going to go through. And I'm going to give you quite a bit of time to go through these. And I'm going to pop through the rooms to see what questions you have. Okay, any other questions about what you're doing? Let me get you into rooms. Okay, rooms are open. Okay. So I just pulled you back in for a little bit. I know some of you were having super good conversations and exploring. So, and some of you got way past this. Some of you got a little stuck. That's okay. Can you see my screen with the name.rb? Yes? Okay, thank you. So I just want to walk through this one method, and then I'm going to let you explore the rest of those options. But I guess, first of all, to the points, to tie some of this back together in terms of the class methods, why is find by name? Why have we made that a class method? Think to yourself for a second. If someone asked you, why is this a class method? What would you say? Hope, yes.
Because you can use it as a class method to make instances that you can iterate through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm using this, right, to create instances, right, which should be the responsibility of the class. Also, though, to search through all those instances to find the ones that match the criteria given, right? So if a group that got this one working, you see I've got a lot of code that's not in here. If you want to volunteer to hop off mute to kind of walk me through writing this code, just so we can talk about it, and then I'll put you back in your breakout room so you can finish exploring those other tasks. Or even a group who didn't get it, if you just want to explore this with me. I'm waiting for a hand. Sean with a U.
Okay, so we did a find all, and we assigned it to what we called names array. So right under, yeah, we did names array equals.
I'll just do like name. How about name matches?
Yeah.
Remember, my personal philosophy is not to put the name of the data type in the name of the variable. So that's why I'm choosing not to do that. So that's my thing. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I'm interested because we've been doing that, and maybe we should avoid that. But anyway, we did rows dot find all do row.
Oh gosh. Cool. And you're doing why find all?
Because we're wanting to iterate through this and find all of the names that are going to equal this argument.
Okay. And let's before we continue, I'm just going to stick a pry in there so we can see, because we already kind of established that rows, when I did this illustration, whoops, okay, what did I do? Did I miss an end? So, wait, what?
Because
I'm missing an end.
Maybe?
Oh, no, yeah, because I have all these equal signs. If I have a variable set equal to something and nothing on the other side, it's going to error. Okay, so we saw last time that rows is this weird thing, but it responds to array methods. So we can use rows, we can think of it as an array. And so that's why we can iterate through it. And then if I take a look at my block variable, what row is holding, that's where the thing that kind of looks like a hash. So I'm guessing it'll respond to our hash methods. So go ahead and keep going, Sean. What did you put inside your block?
And that's pretty much what we did next was we typed in a row, then bracket. We're looking for the key child's first name, which comes in as a string.
And you do have to match it exactly.
And then we actually did dot down case to try to catch all of them.
Cool.
And then set it equals, like double equals, to name dot down case.
Okay, yeah. So they're doing these down cases to like make all the data the same. So they're catching not only the ones that are all caps, but ones that might be normal capitalized with just the first letter or all down cased. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's move our pry here and see what that gets us. So now our name matches, holds, oh gosh, an array. And it looks like each element, I think, is just, let's just look at the first element. Yep, it's just the CSV data that looks like a hash. Okay, what'd you do next, Sean?
And then after that end on line 23, we iterated through this array.
Okay.
So, yep. And we did a dot each.
Okay.
And then do name, because we're picking, or maybe match in your case, do match.
I like that, match, yep.
Then we shoveled it into the results array. And we did like a new, no, I'm sorry. What we were shoveling in, it's kind of interesting. We did new, so new with the argument of name.
Of match.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so, and like, what was the thought process behind this?
Essentially, I believe we were creating a new instance of like this object we were creating. So then we put that into the array.
Yeah, so remember the task asked you to return name objects. So like instances of this name class, which we're currently inside. So we can call either name.new, or you can just call the method directly, calling new, and then match. I'm going to leave that up to you. Sometimes when I'm calling new, I like to be a little explicit just so it's easier for me to read, but you do not have to do that. That's my own personal preference. But then what is this match thing? Well, we know actually match is going to look exactly like this, right? This element that we did. So this is a hash, right? So if I'm sending a hash into .new, then that's what I'm going to expect this data to be, is a hash. So I've got to do some work here to actually be able to instantiate, right? What'd you do here, Sean?
Pretty much we called data, the hash, and then we set up all of the keys here. So much like how we did on line 22, we called child's first name. We pretty much did all those for each of these variables.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of wish I had done this beforehand. What are all the...
Gender, in quotes.
Thank you.
And then the next one is ethnicity, in quotes. Yeah, they're all in quotes.
This a T.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Child's first name, like below. And then count and rank.
And then you realize you don't like working with strings, and symbols are so much easier to work with.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's put our pry here. So we're calling the .new now, which hopefully sending this hash through as the argument, it should find all this hash data and set up our instance variables there. So if we look at results, I would hope that this would be an array of name objects. It looks like it is, and each of the name attributes should match Megan because you did that find all. Cool. And then we could always see like a dot count to see how many you got. 20 matches. Cool. Thank you so much, Sean, for helping me with that. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. What questions do you have about this method? What's still fuzzy, or what feels weird, or We'll take one question. George.
Yeah, I guess I have a lot of questions, but I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the things about pulling out and making helper methods.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, this looks like, you know, it's nicely spaced, but maybe this could be at least 2 different methods.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're just figuring this out, but would this be something then that we would, if I have a class method, does my helper method have to be a class method as well?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. So like if you wanted, let's see, we'd want to call find by name. So maybe the name matches, right? Could be a helper method. Def name matches. What do we think? Do we think if this code is in here, should this be a class method or an instance method?
I'm kind of thinking instance method. But,
why?
I mean, that was just my first instinct.
You just want to say instance methods.
I just want to say instant because I'm more comfortable with that. It also seems like keeping them all the same would also be a thing. So like if I had a helper method for a class method, keeping it a class method would make the most sense too.
Okay. Hope, what do you think?
Class method.
Why?
Because the find by name method is working on the class. So you need to make sure that you can use any helper methods it needs also at the class level.
Okay. And also, if you think about the functionality of what this thing is doing, it's still looking through all the rows of data, right? And remember, that's not the job of an instance, to look through all the information, right? It's like each instance is kind of siloed in terms of what the data that it can access, but the class can access all the data for its instances. So it makes sense that this helper method would also be a class method. And then here we can call that, remember you can, actually I'm glad you asked that question, because now we would call this class method from this class method just by name. You don't have to put the self in front of it here, because remember I mentioned like that self dot is implied in Ruby. Whenever a method is called from inside a method, Ruby automatically puts the self dot in front of it, so you don't actually need it. So just like with instance methods, you can call helper methods just by calling that instance method from an instance method. We can do the same thing at the class method level. We just call other class methods by their name, and we don't have to include the self dot part. Cheryl, your hand was up. I'm not sure if you had a question or not.
I keep putting it up and down because I keep getting confused. But now I am also confused because I thought when this existed, when you first built it, the self.name matches was above the results being shoveled in.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it the opposite, where we shoveled in the results and made new name methods and then selected kind of the upcase names. Is there a difference of having one above the other? We also did get a different count.
It does. Well, the order that you put it in is going to depend on the variables that you define, right? Because remember, Ruby reads top to bottom. So if you have I'm calling this here, how did we have this before? See, I should have just commented it out and not, we had it as name matches equals this, right? Oh, goodness gracious. Thank you for your patience, friends. I'll figure this out, right? This is what we had, I think. And then this was not here, right?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, I didn't put it, I have no pry in there. So this works because I guess I don't understand the question.
Maybe that's why I put my hand down, because I don't know if I understand my question either. I'm a little confused, but I don't really understand why.
Okay.
So I will just think about it more. Thanks.
Yeah. Aiden, go ahead.
I think I know why you might be confused, Cheryl. So your question was probably about, is there a difference in like doing something if you did the putting it in name things first or selecting them first, right? Okay. So I believe the only difference would be in like speed, because then you would be making all of the names into name instances versus just the ones that you selected from the actual table.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you could, right, exactly. So you could instantiate every CSV row into a name object first, and then use, you know, that like, oh gosh, and then use a find all to check each of the name, like name dot, what's the attribute, name dot name, to check if that equals Heidi. So you could do it that way too. I think there's pros and cons to both ways. It just depends on how you've structured your app. Yeah, I see your question. That was a good question.
I was also curious because we got 29 instead of 20.
Yeah, after we implemented the upcase, we also got 29. But.
And we only got 20? Did you do the for Megan?
Yeah, and we did upcase instead of downcase. I don't know if that makes a difference, but.
Oh, that shouldn't make a difference, but that's interesting that we got a different amount.
It is, because we also got 29. Sorry, Kat.
Oh, you're good. Oh, wait, you guys got 29, but me, Kat, I'm getting 20?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. Maybe I have outdated CSV data. It's very possible, because I loaded this months and months and months ago. I don't know how often that actual CSV file is updated. But if you all are getting 29, then it sounds like that's the number to go for with your CSV data.
Yeah. There were some duplicates that I saw actually, though, which was a bit strange.
Okay, interesting. So we don't have too much time. I guess I'm trying to think. I wish we had more time for for you to explore other of those tasks. But I don't want to just throw you and break our arms for a couple minutes and then end it. So I guess, well, I don't know, maybe we can do one together if you want. Yeah, okay. Was there one in particular? Well, maybe like number 2 or 3. What do you think? What do you all want to do? You don't know, you don't care.
I would like to see the max one, or the second one where you use maybe you find the max of the entire set of data for, say, count, rank.
Wait, so like number 3?
Sure. Yeah. That would be it.
So
is that too far in? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. So the next one asks you to, so here we're looking specifically at the name field, right? We only want to find or instantiate or return, really, not instantiate. We just want to return name objects that match the name that's provided. So how would we do this if instead of wanting to search by name, we wanted to search for like the year, for example, right? So here's our set of data here. We can see like year of birth, 2011. So what if we wanted all the name objects that match the year of 2011? So class or instance method on this one? George? Class method, right? Why though?
Similar to what we were doing before with the name, we're going to go through that whole list. And so we want to see, because the class sees all of it, we want to see all of it too. We want to search it.
Yeah, the class knows all, right? And instances don't know all. So if we're ever wanting something where we're like, look through all the things and only find the ones that meet this condition, then that's always going to be a class method, because the class has access to all of that information. So if this is find by year, right, and then it's going to take an input of a year, well, it's actually going to look very similar to what we did before. But what we could do is, here, I'm going to take these two things because we still want to read this in. Right now, heads up, we've got some repetition of code here. We probably could refactor that out somehow. That we're not going to do that right now, though. So what we might do also, though, is I'm thinking rows. I'm just going to do an each. And I'm going to put some extra logic inside of my each. So here, oh, I need to invoke this method or it will not call it. Name.find by year, and we're going to pass it 2000. We'll do 12. We'll do 11. I know there's some 11s. So now if we run this, we'll hit my pry right here. Since I've invoked this method, I can see that my row looks just like the rows that we have. And so I can call my year of birth. Okay, and I'm going to compare it to the year that was passed in. So this argument here that's passed into the actual method, and it'll give me a true or a false because I'm doing my comparison operator. So I think what I want to do, I do like how this is broken up into 2 steps. If we didn't want to do that, we could just put a conditional inside of here. So if row year of birth is equal to the year argument, then go ahead and shovel in the instance and then return the results. Right? So when there's a match, then I'm going to instantiate and put that into this array, and then I will return that. I think the other interesting thing that you could do is, so working with objects in Ruby is a lot faster than working with CSV data, right? Because if you think about CSV data, what this is doing, it's constantly reading in these lines. And that CSV file is like 19,000 lines. That's not a very fast process. So what we could have done maybe is created a variable. It wouldn't be an instance variable. See, this is where class variables come in. Or maybe we have another class or something that stores all of this information for us. And what I'm thinking is it would actually instantiate everything. Like all names. I'm sorry, that wouldn't be in here. Yeah, a shovel, right? So if there was, this is a terrible example. If we had, it wouldn't be contained to this method, but if all names held all the, sorry, I'm pausing because I keep thinking of better solutions as I talk through this. What if we did do this? Oh my gosh. Okay, this is a nice to know and not a need to know. I'm totally like just going down a rabbit hole right now. But what if you did have a helper method that was like all names? And this helper method, what it did was it pulled all the data for you. Right? It took every line of CSV data and instantiated every line. Then how would that change the result of this kind of search process? Then what we could do is call all names, and we could just call it like that because we're in a class method calling another class method. Now we could do a find all here, and we don't need to instantiate anymore. Maybe this is a name object now. So we can do name.year is equal to year, and then we don't need this, and we don't need this. Right now, this find all is going to return to us already the array, which are already name objects. They're already instantiated because of this helper method here. So what I'm not illustrating very well in this example is that if there's a way to pull in all of your CSV data and store it as objects, then you can just do all of these tasks by looking through this array of objects, rather than looking to CSV data and pulling in CSV data every time we want to search through that data. Okay, I'll go in order. George, your hand is up. I don't know if it's still up or if you do have a question. Okay, Joshua, go ahead.
So then in your all names class method, the all names that you are shoveling each instantiated row would be
not necessary.
Okay, so I'm wondering if you could, if you scroll up your class variable, if you were to that class variable, you just did your read method of that CSV, so you have access to the CSV. I guess I want to be able to use this class variable in a more effective way than it's currently being used right now, I guess, is my thought process.
I don't like class variables because I think people end up using them as like a container for just extra information that they want, and instead of being focused about where that variable should live. So the only reason we're using a class variable here is so we can use the CSV data here across like multiple methods. I see what you're saying, but I don't want to encourage the use of class variables.
Okay, and I guess kind of, because my thought process was if you set your class, I don't know if this would work, if you could set your class variable equal to this class method of all names, so that the class variable is like your array of actual objects. So rather than like reading through every time you want to access the objects of names, rather than doing that every single time, it's just done once.
Right, yeah. I want to answer without giving a clear answer, because this is going to be part of your group project struggle, is exactly what you're saying, right? Sorry, because you're right. You don't want to read in CSV data every time you run a method, right? You only want to read it in one time. Read in all that CSV data and instantiate all the items and store them somewhere that you can access, that you can access that data over and over without reinstantiating all those CSV lines every time. What classes have we had so far? You've had modules, class methods, inheritance. Okay. Right. I don't know how to answer this too well without giving things away, but you know, it could be, you can make multiple classes, maybe whose class's job is just to read CSV data. Yeah, that's part of the challenge with this one, is where to store all those instances. So I'm sorry I can't be more direct on that, but I don't want to be. I want you to think about that. Garrett, last question, and then I'm supposed to be in a meeting.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of a comment and a little bit of a question. So I actually ran into this exact problem with like on the project, and essentially like when you don't create objects and you're just reading through the data every time and there's a ton of data, like take it from me, your tests can literally run for hours.
Yeah.
Like literally hours. And if you're having to have it read through the data every time you're basically doing anything, and there's like, 15, 20,000 things it's reading through, like your tests will become just not usable. So that was really helpful to kind of hear that, because I wasn't exactly sure what the issue was, but now I know what the issue is that I wasn't creating objects.
Yeah, definitely think about this in terms of your project. Like how can, you don't want to be reading in CSV data every time. So think about some kind of like, and architecture, we're going to have refactoring and planning time on Friday for kind of this specific thing, right? But you want to start thinking about like, how can I instantiate all these rows of data once and then use that collection of instances to do all of my calculations rather than, reading in CSV data for every single method, because you're right, it's super, super slow. Also, another thing, if this wasn't already mentioned, for your tests, you can create what are called fixture files. Did you all talk about fixture files? You can create subsets of your CSV data just for testing purposes, because those the CSV files you have are massive, right? Like thousands and thousands of lines. So if you create a subset of like 25 of those lines for your test to read, that's going to help your testing suites run faster, if that makes sense. Maybe? Okay. If that doesn't make sense, or if you've got more questions about it, start a thread in the backend code help channel, and we can like talk about that. But that's it for this class. So really remember, I know I threw in CSV stuff in here because I think it's relevant to the projects you're working on, but ultimately I want you to think about that difference between a class method and an instance method. When would we use the class method versus an instance method, and be able to explain that, okay? Okay, that's all I got for you. You can all vouch for me when they yell at me for being late to the meeting, okay?
Thanks, Kat.